or the camp? I go to the store. Cheese. Cheese. Breathe.
In this room, there's a sense of hope,
Ghosts.
innocence,
Are they here?
and possibility. In this room, everything seems so simple. Things weren't so simple in our city the second week of April 2001. The national spotlight cast Cincinnati in a very harsh light, exposing the deep racial divide and tension that existed between the black community and the police.
Although many years have passed, that time of anger, fear, frustration, and resentment calls for our reflection. Has Cincinnati changed? Is our city a better place to live for all people?
Tonight's documentary brings the conversation about a changed Cincinnati into your home.
Let's take a brief look back at the complexities that fueled the unrest so that we see how far we've come, where we're headed, and how some propose we tell a new story of our city, one that inspires hope, change, and the possibility of an even better Cincinnati.
As I recall, it was sad because, we really hadn't seen such outplay of violence in a long, long time in Cincinnati.
The whole incident seems surreal. Surreal is the easiest way to say it. I just couldn't believe it was going on.
I recall a long road to April 7, 2001. For me, the tipping point was not Timothy Thomas, it was Roger Owensby Jr. And that is when I think a lot of black folks in the community really, it went from like a simmer and a whisper to what is the police department doing, to palpable outrage. And there seemed to be this feeling that people were having sort of like inside their head conversations about the next thing that happens, I'm going off, and that was Timothy Thomas.
For me, the spirit of the time in 2001 was a spirit of activism in our city. It was a spirit of grassroots activism where groups came together like the Black United Front, Concerned Citizens for Justice, Coalition for a Just Cincinnati, the Black Fist, the Cultural Commission. They just sprang up, and people were fed up at the conditions that African Americans were living in their communities. They were fed up with the response from government and the business community. It came on the heels of 13 downtown restaurants closing their doors to African Americans during the Jazz Festival in the year 2000, which is unthinkable. If it were 1950, that would be understandable. But for it to happen in the year 2000, for 13 restaurants to close their doors with 50,000 African Americans walking the streets with money in their pockets, and at that time the city leaders made excuses for that kind of behavior. And it was just a festering mood at that time.
I live in East Walnut Hills and have lived there ever since for 24 years. And our street, every house on our street was vandalized that night. I was awake in bed and heard this noise and went to the window and saw about 20 young men come up our driveway and onto our porch, and then heard the crash of glass. And woke my husband up and ran upstairs where our kids were, and we were afraid.
Overnight, everybody was looking at the city. I remember calls from my family and friends and just wondering, like, why are you there and when are you leaving? Because I'm not seeing this as a place that you wanted to be long term. And so, yeah, it was definitely a very different place.
My recollection is that there was a breakdown, I think, in communication. I never, ever think that violence is an appropriate response to, if in fact there was an injustice that took place. People taking to the streets and committing acts of violence on otherwise innocent people is never an appropriate response. And ultimately, I think everything that unfolded after that, in the short term at least, was ruinous for downtown Cincinnati. If you recall at the time, Main Street was booming, bars, and people were going down there, and it was a great time, and then all the business dried up.
Well, it was a terrible time. It was an awful time. It was the closest thing that I've experienced to war. The polarization of the community and seemingly really no place upon which to build some type of reconciliation. Had the African American community on one side, police department on the other, myself somewhere in between, and really no bridge to connect.
In Cincinnati 2001, the environment was very not inclusive, not wanting to hear the voices of the people.
2.5 months after I moved here, the April 7th unrest hit the community, and everything changed for a lot of people, I think, on that day. Immediately, I think, there were many people and many organizations who said, we obviously need to do something. This isn't right. Many were upset and concerned that the community was not together on some of the core issues, really, of our community. And I remember feeling concerned and upset, not just for the family and the situation that occurred, but also that a community that I had just come to was torn apart so dramatically.
However you may feel about what happened, why it happened, or whether it should have happened, the unrest of April 2001 was a catalyst for change. Several people are working to transform both the reality of our city and the perception. A lot has changed.
One of the core issues that led to the riots, and that is the shooting of Timothy Thomas, an officer being dishonest about the shooting of Timothy Thomas, creating an inability for the police department to be accountable to the public, who are the people that give us the power and authority we have to enforce the law as police officers. If I can't be accountable back to that public, how can I expect you to have trust in me or believe that I have assumed the public trust associated with this badge, this uniform, this power, this authority? How can you expect that I will conduct myself in an honorable fashion when somehow we've agreed to tolerate someone being less than truthful? We can't do that.
And we have to put it in context because we often get caught with change. I remember our very first monitoring team. It was a team that was led by a guy by the name of Kalmanoff. That was his last name. I think he lasted here in the city maybe a year or so. And his team came in and all parties met. And their team told us to not expect any significant change for 10 years. It took the air out of my wings. I was just devastated because the black community needed a win. We needed to say that we accomplished something, that we worked towards a goal, and we got there. But to hear 10 years put into it was like, wow. And guess what? They were absolutely right.
First of all, I never thought it would happen. And I really didn't. I was very skeptical. I never thought it would happen because it was just a circus. It was just the whole collaborative agreement. It was just a circus, and the police department was so rigid about all this. It took them a minute to relax and acquiesce. So I never thought it would happen. And then also, I never wanted to be on camera saying that the Cincinnati Police Department has gotten better. But here I am in 2011. I'll give them the credit, though.
The greatest strides we made were in police-community relations. Through the work of the collaborative and all of the groups that fought to make that happen, with the police being at the table, the FOP at the table, the Cincinnati Black United Front, and that work has continued, and we can't afford to see that dismantled. Gains and strides that were made since 2001 can easily be lost. I think we all need to be mindful of that. And I'm thankful that there have been people who have continued. Our attorneys are still working on it. Sister Iris Rowley, there are people who've been continuous, and the police force, and Chief Stryker and others. So that's been probably the greatest gain since 2001.
We've just seen a lot of changes, in addition to the notable changes in the implementation of the police citizen reforms.
The Citizens Complaint Authority, CCA, tracked complaints against officers since 2004, following the collaborative agreement mandate. The criterion used is any officer with complaints from at least 10 complainants over a 3-year period, and any citizen who filed more than 3 complaints during that same period. CCA conducted a review for potential repeat officer and citizen complaints for 2010 and found no officers on the list for 2010.
If I am a citizen in Cincinnati and something's going down on my corner and I call up, you know, I'm not a passive person anymore. You don't just call up 911 and go away. You actually can get involved. If that's a repeat problem, you're going to be on the problem-solving team to solve that problem. That's very exciting. And I think people, as they experience this, will see that this is worth continuing to grow.
We're talking about changing institutions, changing people's thoughts, changing people's minds, and then ultimately changing their actions. So while we were changing the police department, the community had to look into itself and see, what do I fit in? How do I change? How can I become the change that I want to see on the other side? And that's huge. That's huge. And so we've been constantly working with youth on knowing their rights, helping them to build their knowledge of what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, what is real, what's not real, what you should do, what you should not do.
Well, I was your typical knucklehead street guy. I mean, I was running around, selling dope, selling drugs, running the streets.
Dante credits SERVE, the Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence, and people like Stan Ross for helping him change his life.
I just knew that you had to meet people where they are mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and do it with some moral integrity behind it.
SERVE is a macro problem-solving project, okay, a creative approach to address this issue of homicides.
Dante went to SERVE's very first call-in, and he remembers hearing the police's message loud and clear about what would happen to him if he didn't change his life. But Dante says their threats are not what made him change.
What made me change was the other side of the room, which was the community, which was Dr. Garcia, Stan Ross. Those are the people who made my ears perk up. Ross Love, rest in peace. Those were the people who perked my interest, saying that we can help you get out of this lifestyle and live a productive life, regardless of your past. And I'm like, okay, I've sold drugs basically all my life, been in the streets almost all my life, and you're telling me that you can get me out of this lifestyle and into a productive, real lifestyle where I can have a job with benefits and take care of my family. Only job I've ever been accustomed to was maybe a $8, $9, $10 hour job working in a factory or something. Like, you can't take care of your family on that. Like, and that doesn't come with benefits. So it perked my interest. It did.
Problem-oriented policing is actually efficient policing. If you want more police on the street, that means you are promoting the symbol of policing, but you're not really efficiently using those scarce government resources. We have 300,000 service calls every year. Let's find out who the repeat victims are. Let's find out who the repeat perpetrators are and where the repeat locations are. Let's target our resources on those repeat problems. And all of those communities, black, white, whatever, are going to get more efficient policing by doing the sort of data-driven, problem-oriented policing that we came up with through the collaborative. That's just smart. Let's not relax. One of the last things that I said to the command staff is we never want to revisit April of 2001 again. You know, the times that led up to it and the times that we had to endure going through it, we never want to revisit that.
There have been many other obvious changes to our city, over the past 10 years.
It's been a dynamic 10 years. It has been a 10 years of some phenomenal sociological changes in our community. During this period of time, we've seen influx of a sizable Latino community now that has its own chamber of commerce and a number of advocacy groups, and is becoming increasingly more established. So we have a third major group in town now.
We saw an explosion within the working class moving here to Cincinnati. And then at the same time, aided by the growth in some of the other corporations here, the multinationals, the international places like P&G, that have brought in these foreign nationals. So you have a good mixture of your white-collar and blue-collar folks that are living in Cincinnati. We do lack that generational depth.
We've seen the liberation of a lot of our gay and lesbian neighbors due to the repeal of Cincinnati's infamous Article 12 anti-gay charter amendment in 2004 that has allowed them to live more openly in our society. We've seen the emergence of a growing Muslim community that is working very hard to be mainstream, not only in a religious life in our community, but in civic life as well.
Look at the physical landscape. Look what's gone on in terms of development and redevelopment in over the Rhine, in particular. The very place where much of this unrest, occurred is now a transforming and vibrant neighborhood. But we've also seen the rebirth of the central business district around Fountain Square. We see the activity and development emerging on the banks of the Ohio River. In Cincinnati, also in northern Kentucky, a tremendous amount of development to provide more opportunities for everyone.
As it relates to economic development, Laura Bruner of Al Nair Incorporated is driving an effort to include more diverse players in the corporate real estate game.
When we really get back to this racial unrest that had to do with economic inclusion, we should be talking about wealth, not just jobs and not just revenue of businesses. We ought to be talking about wealth. And so I've been focusing on what I've called this wealth gap. And so I set about to say we need to get some African Americans involved in owning commercial real estate. And then the Vernon Manor opportunity came up, and we realized very quickly this is perfect. This asset matters so much to the African American community. There's an emotional tie there. And then, quite frankly, to make a success out of this project, we had to have community support. We ended up with about 12 people who were willing, and when they wrote the checks to invest, it was risky. We did not have our financing in place. We did not have a lease with Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So at that point, we were buying an empty hotel. So, and the good thing about it is it's been a great example of, okay, you saw the risk, you definitely bought into the risk, and now here it's turning out to be a very successful project. And they're benefiting from the reward side as well.
We've been really working to introduce majority companies with minority companies, getting them in the room and having them build relationships and having them build trust.
As evidenced by the Banks Project, the recent casino development, and the redevelopment in Over the Rhine.
If you were injured in a car accident and you had multiple injuries, and the doctor said, we can treat some of these other injuries, but until we deal with the major source of what hurt you, you will never be fully healed. OTR has been our major injury. When you look at the historical trends of the crime, the disinvestment, the abandonment, it's adjacent to downtown. We can't ignore it. And so there have been companies, institutions, people that have rallied to fix that. And it can't get fixed in a year or two. And so if we stay with it and get OTR to closer to its potential, the entire city benefits.
With change comes criticism. There are those who harshly challenge the Cincinnati Center City Development Corporation's work, and not because they believe the redevelopment of Over the Rhine is a bad idea.
Development is good, but it also should include the voices of the people that are here now, and I haven't seen a lot of that happening.
In the downtown, kind of especially over the Rhine, and then some neighboring neighborhoods. For years across this entire country, people who are in poverty have been pushed from their homes and removed from their neighborhoods in an effort to reintroduce people with dollars. And we call that gentrification, and it is alive and well and more than it has been at this point in the past 20 years. And to us, those sorts of things where outsiders, often not even from this city, come in and say they've got a particular game plan for a neighborhood and don't include the neighborhood in the game plan, that creates those same sort of tensions that result in civil unrest. And we are doing that now. We are, as a city, folks with corporate power and money are pushing other people who have already been closer to the margins further to the margins, and that just creates distrust, it creates anger, it creates division, and eventually people rise up. We get accused of being conservative and wanting the status quo and being against development, and the truth is that we, and I think much of Over the Rhine and much of the Central Business District and neighboring neighborhoods are not against development.
The issue of gentrification constantly comes up. I think that is sort of a standard question when any redevelopment occurs. I think it's important that people be reminded that essentially that section of Over the Rhine was for the most part vacant. People had made a decision to move. So there is ongoing condominium development going on. It's not like the condominium development are at levels that people can't afford them. So there is affordable home ownership opportunities made available. There are rental developments that are going on that are made available. We have a number of developments that we're undertaking that have either supportive housing services associated with them or a set aside of affordable rental units. But the problem is that there was a lack of ownership in that neighborhood. And there are, in that same area that we're talking about, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of affordable units that are presently there.
I'm not impressed by all of this gateway quarter development. Somebody put some money in these buildings and put these homeless people in there and build an infrastructure where they can have 30 or 45 or 60 days in a room off the street, out of the elements. And then maybe they have to get out and let somebody else come in and they can cycle back in. We have too much vacant buildings that developers look at and see dollar signs. And when you don't take care of the least of these, that's a terrible reflection on the rest of us. That's a terrible reflection.
There is tension. And I think that a lot of that tension comes from when we're seeing a lot of money being pumped into this neighborhood for redevelopment. The School for Performing Arts, that's a $90 million project. You've got Washington Park, the renovation of Washington Park, $50 million. You've got the planned $100 million renovation of Music Hall. So there's a lot of money that's coming into the neighborhood. And I think that there's a sense of, don't forget about the folks that have been here for 40 or 50 years, that are disenfranchised, that are disadvantaged. And that's kind of where these conversations are of how do we raise the level of service, and let's make sure that they're not forgotten.
The city has developed a focus where they want to promote the attraction of young professionals, kind of this hip, happening 20s age group. And I think it's at the expense of middle-class families.
While we have been investing there, we have not abandoned the rest of the city. There have been new jobs created in Bond Hill, in Madisonville. We've brought new companies in, Humana located along I-71. We just had the American Red Cross locate over at Keystone. There have been investments. We're partnering with Xavier on the growth of that campus. We are implementing Go Cincinnati. So there have been jobs, there have been growth, there have been things to be proud of all around the city. But we cannot ignore OTR needs attention in a major way.
In terms of education, Cincinnati Public Schools have made tremendous strides. The graduation rates went from 51% to 83% over the past 10 years, and CPS is now the only urban school district with an effective rating overall.
It was about 10 years ago when we started to look at our large comprehensive high schools, where oftentimes students would just be a number, because if you've got 1,500, 2,000 students in a building, it is hard to get to know everyone. And with the Gates grant, we broke our high schools down into small, almost you could call them boutique high schools, where they had a theme or an emphasis, and we allowed all of our students with a Metro Pass to choose whatever high school they wanted to go to. And I think that was the hook that has kept our youngsters in high school and has improved our graduation rate.
One of CPS's bright stars is Taft High School, which over the past 10 years went from worst to first. Taft seems to have a model that works.
For a lot of years, I think people thought it was a nice experiment, what we were doing over there, but it wasn't ever going to work. Okay, well, back in 2005, CBS Evening News came to town. Recently, ABC has. They've won the Blue Ribbon Award, and now all of a sudden we're gurus. Yeah, we've had a lot of interest over the last 9 years, and of course, if you think that winning the Blue Ribbon Award and getting that excellent status and graduating over 95% of your kids, if you think that that's the finish line, then I guess we can all wave a checkered flag and say it's over. But the fact is, it ain't over. Okay, it's one kid at a time, and one class at a time, one graduating class at a time, and we think our mission's far from being over.
So, how do we create more success stories like Taft? School board member Eileen Cooper Reed.
2 years ago, first when Mary Ronan became the superintendent, she started the elementary initiative, which is what we've been asking for a while, which is take the lowest performing schools and infuse some additional resources into them so that you can lift them up. And that's in fact exactly what she did. She turned 8 of those schools around in the first year, and the other ones were well on their way. So 16 schools of 50 schools is a lot of schools. So that is what lifted us up to the effective category, the fact that we really focused on and targeted those schools that were really not instructing children in the way that they needed to be instructed.
One of the seeds planted after April 2001 that is now blooming results is Success by 6. Many leaders believe that focusing energy and investment in children from the cradle with the goal of achieving kindergarten readiness is a key ingredient for success. Strive, a learning board created in 2005, is entrenched in this work along with the United Way.
We've known for some time that if you can get a child ready to learn at age 5 or 6, statistically speaking, that child is going to be successful in school. They're going to graduate from high school. They're going to enroll in some post-secondary form of education. They're going to graduate and enter into a career that produces a middle-class wage. That we know. I would describe where we are now as sort of trending in the right direction. So we have one major assessment, which is this crawl score. And if a child scores 19 or above, statistically speaking, they're going to do much better academically. And the odds of them, graduating from high school, entering some post-secondary experience, graduating from that and entering a good paying career go up significantly. We're up 9 points in the city of Cincinnati, a 9 percentage point increase. And we have an emerging goal, over the course of the next 10 years to get to 85%. Now, that's not every kid, and that's the problem, right? I mean, we have to have sort of a disposition that it's every single child being successful every step of the way. That's how you get to, the strongest possible city.
Building upon the successes over the past 10 years, people like Dr. Victor Garcia and Peter Block and Milton Dehoney are crafting a new story about the kind of city Cincinnati could be.
This aspirational goal of really health and prosperity for all children, right, of all species, for all generations, for all times, yeah, it's possible. And it's possible within our lifetime. That's what's exciting.
If you say Cincinnati is not a problem to be solved, it's a potential, it's a capacity to be realized and seen, it aggravates all of us. I've decided to take my identity from the possibilities of this city. Okay, that's the city that I am in the process of creating. And there's no denial of its suffering. There's no denial of its racism. But we don't need another study documenting racism. We've had 12 in the last 14 years, and guess what? They all found out that there's racism in Cincinnati. So that leads me to conclude another study won't help. What will help is to find and honor and make visible and lift up those people that are healing our wounds and are gifted, even though they're poor. To be poor is not to not have money. To be poor is to live without possibility. So anybody who offers possibility to people on the margin, to people living with disabilities or recovering from mental, anybody doing that is heroic. And why don't we say that's who we are, even though there's 1,000 miles to go?
We need to, as a community, come to a consensus, as hard as that may be, exactly what kind of city do we want, and be able to articulate, here is what we will get if we become the city that we're talking about.
That's our whole core mission, is getting people to see and understand Cincinnati in a different light.
We need to be reminded of our actual story. We don't need a new story. We need to be reacquainted with the story of the city of Cincinnati. This is a city that was settled by people who understood the value of family, who understood the value of banding together and staying together and looking after one another, even when you're not related. This is a city that took on innovative projects and innovative ideas and was progressive at many points in its history. We need to be reminded of those things. We need to be reminded of the greatness of the city of Cincinnati and all that has come from this city in terms of business and medicine and education. We've built some great institutions here. We've built great arts and cultural institutions. We just need to be reminded of how great Cincinnati really is and build on that greatness toward the future.
I moved to this city, people say, what are you doing here? Did you make a mistake? And so that's been the work, is to say, how do you counterbalance the empire that controls the narrative of our urban centers, which tells us over and over again, we're wrong. We should be afraid. Stay out of the city. Lock those people up. So after a while you begin to think it's true. And that's not who we are. Now as soon as you talk this way, the news media thinks you're doing human interest. The camera and everything says this isn't news. News is the dark side. We're investigative by nature. Well, that's not true. It's not who we are. And so anytime you talk about the possibility of a city, you get a backlash. You get people saying, you're crazy. You don't know what it's like around here. And these are the people who are victims of the negative narrative. Even the victims will fight back and say, no, I'd rather have the crumbs, okay, than to change my mind about the possibilities of the place that I live in. Because as soon as you talk about possibilities, there's a burden of accountability that falls on them.
Whether you agree with the mayor or Peter Block, we must discuss certain inescapable realities that shape the story and must be faced in conversations about creating sustainable change.
In looking at the systems or indicators for the quality of life in our city, we must look at education, public safety, jobs, income, home ownership, and affordable housing and health. The latest census numbers declare a 10% decline in the city of Cincinnati's population from 2000 to 2010. This drop in population begs the question, why? Why are people leaving the city?
In a recent informal WCPO poll, our viewers tell us that the reasons behind the shift in population away from the city are people seeking better educational opportunities for their children, safer neighborhoods, and jobs. In Cincinnati's 52 neighborhoods, schools can be designated as either excellent with distinction, excellent, effective, continuous improvement, academic watch, or academic emergency. According to the 2009-2010 report cards for Cincinnati Public Schools, only 2 out of 18 secondary schools were rated excellent. Of the 41 elementary schools, only 5 were rated excellent. While we've heard practically unanimous credit given to the impact of the collaborative agreement on improving relations between the police and the black community and in reducing Part 1 crimes, the number of murders committed in our city is still alarming. According to the Cincinnati Health Department, the rate of homicides from 2001 to 2007 was 19.1 per 100,000 people, triple the national average of 6.1 per 100,000 people. Black youth continue to be murdered at alarming rates. Over the past 10 years, the number of black homicide victims peaked at 68 in 2005. In 2010, 59 of the 73 homicide victims were black.
I could tell you the most hurtful, the hardest part of my job was attending funerals. I probably in the last 2 years have attended 60, 70 funerals. Easy. You walk into a church or a funeral home and you see a young girl laying in a casket with her baby on her chest. I cannot tell you how that feels. It's horrifying.
Over the past 10 years, we've also seen the number of individuals and families living in poverty increase.
We have lingering problems. Clearly, that's an undeniable problem that really requires priority or attention by the region, because the city is the heart of this 8-county region that we live in. And as long as we allow that many of our fellow citizens living in poverty, we're going to have problems.
And perhaps the most disturbing temperature gauge for the health of this city is the infant mortality rate, which for the city of Cincinnati marked 13.5 per 1,000 children born in 2008. So for every 1,000 children born, more than 13 died. That is double the national average of 7 per 1,000, according to the Cincinnati Health Department.
Infant mortality rates in our community remain too high. I think that, I continue to be too silent on that issue. We have zip codes that are 27.5 per 1,000. So our overall infant mortality rate is double digits. It's third world country, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Our infant mortality rates are at third world country levels here in Hamilton County, and I think it is the greatest disgrace for our county right now and for our city to have that kind of an infant mortality rate when we have Fortune 500 companies that are so concentrated in downtown, and we have one of the greatest children's hospitals located in the world. How do you have that kind of an infant mortality rate? And what it says is that the quality of life for a very important constituent, African Americans, is not growing. It's actually declining. And we can't put our heads in the sand. When you see a thermometer, I'm a stockbroker, I watch the Dow, I watch the S&P, I watch the Russell 2000. Those are thermometers. Well, the infant mortality rate is a thermometer on the health of a community. Clearly, that number being staggering like that means we're in crisis here.
While it's hard to argue with the numbers, Cincinnati's Health Department Commissioner Dr. Noble Maseru says that intervention is the key to bringing the city's overall infant mortality rate down into the single digits. And he has proof based on the 507 women who gave birth while participating in the Health Department's Infant Vitality Surveillance Network from 2005 to 2007.
In terms of preventable deaths, that our desire to have single-digit infant mortality rates in the respective zip codes, if the city overall, which is 13.5 infant mortality rate, if the city overall had the infant mortality rate of the health department had in 2007 of a 7.1 infant mortality rate, there would have been 51 fewer infant deaths.
And according to Dr. Maseru, the prematurity rates have dropped and their infant mortality rates have dropped with the women the health department served, saving precious lives and millions of dollars that could have been spent in the neonatal intensive care unit. Dr. Maseru's goal is to expand the Infant Vitality Surveillance Network to all hospitals where babies are born in the city. University Hospital has been a part of the network for 1 year, and Good Samaritan Hospital, the hospital where the majority of babies are born in Cincinnati, recently agreed to be a part of the program.
What this does is it provides accountability. Accountability in terms of we know which health plans mothers are participating in. We know the physicians that are responsible not only for the delivery, but also on the front end in terms of who's providing the prenatal care and the postpartum care. What is needed that has to be developed, okay, is to have the home visitation component of what we call the care coordination component.
In terms of home ownership over the past 10 years, the percentage of people in owner-occupied units has actually grown 4 percentage points, although the number of overall occupied housing units has gone down. In terms of public housing, there are approximately 16,000 households that are part of the 2 housing programs that the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority administers, the Housing Choice Voucher and Public Housing Programs.
When we look at where are we now and what are our challenges, one of the questions you asked earlier, clearly it's come to my attention, I wasn't particularly aware of this, that housing is a major challenge for us. Within our, we have 16,000 people that are being supported here in low-income housing in Hamilton County, and over 90% of them are African American. That just strikes me as intolerable. We cannot have people living their entire lives in public housing. So unfortunately, it's not just a housing issue. We've got to work to marry housing up with social service agencies and certainly education, so that we can really create opportunities for people to all, achieve the American dream.
So how do we make Cincinnati a healthier and more prosperous city for all people?
We are a city that, in my view, is very polite. We like polite conversation. We don't really want to talk about anything that makes people uncomfortable. But sometimes talking about uncomfortable things is how you get to a point where you no longer need to. And I would encourage us to be open to that.
We have a city manager right now who's totally committed to these reforms. He's done a great job of leading this effort as it's really become the fabric of our community. Where is that commitment among our elected leaders? I don't know, but we need to have a community that stays vigilant to fight for this stuff, because the last thing we need to do is reinvent all this.
We need to care about each other a little bit more than what we do.
And when I was coroner, I saw a lot of sad things. Not so much just the violence, but seeing elderly people that weren't checked on, seeing young kids that just weren't being fed correctly, young children not being clothed, or even being loved. And we truly underestimate the power of love when you truly say you love your community and love the people there. It's a city where you have some of the top corporations in this country, in our city, and yet it's a city where children still go hungry. It's a city where you have such good people, but yet we're not meeting in the middle of the road and coming together and looking out for everyone in the city. We still have such areas of violence that we shouldn't have. And so much is related to, again, something I think as simple as education. When you look at the violence, and I think some of the things in the city that I like to correct, it is simple as simply teaching a child how to read. And yet we don't do that. We just don't care enough about each other still. We talk the talk, but I don't think we really walk the talk.
Some of us are of the mindset that as long as it stays over there, it doesn't affect me in my day-to-day life. It really, it doesn't bother me, but it does. I mean, there is no way, given our interconnectedness, the systems that we're all part of, that what happens in one part of the boat that's sinking is not going to ultimately affect all of us who are on that same boat.
Dr. Garcia, along with the help of those like Peter Block and academics like Peter Senge and David Cooperrider, are looking at the opportunity of changing Cincinnati on the scale of the whole. But what does that really mean?
What we have found is that when you have this gathering of the most improbable set of people, i.e. CEOs with faith-based leaders, church leaders, gang members, former gang members, mothers of killed children, and they're together and they're engaged in conversation, okay, the dialogue. But there's some guidance because we don't know how to talk with each other. We've forgotten that. That was part of what we experienced at the workshop on September 11th. We had the most improbable group of people. And I still look at the pictures to see, this black gang guy with his hat and the CEO there, and they're sort of looking at each other like this, and they're excited about what they're co-creating, and then they get up and they share it, and then there's high fives at the end of the session, and then you say, yes, we can do this, getting the whole system in the room, and then effectively engaging them in conversation. And really, it's conversation that then leads to the relationships, and then those relationships allow people to see each other differently.
Dr. Garcia is in the midst of planning a much larger 3-day summit for later this year to attract a very unlikely group of people.
And so what he's planning, and many of us are supporting, is to say, well, let's figure out how to get every party into the conversation about healing the woundedness of our city.
Let's meet some of the people that Dr. Garcia would like to see at the summit later this year.
Given a societal will to help people, if we were to put people first, I think that it is possible. I think that we're willing to spend $25,000 or $30,000 per person on a prison bed and putting people into prison. But we're not willing to spend $5,000 or $10,000 per person to be able to really give a person the intense assistance that they need in order to succeed on the other side. So it really takes a willingness, a political will, a will of the community to say that people are important. And when people are important, we change the focus of how we spend our dollars.
Everybody's got their ideas on how to make the city a better place. Some people believe it's a streetcar. I don't think you can bring prosperity with a streetcar, personally. I think it has to do with safety and security and cleanliness. And that is the foundation upon which all good, crime-free societies are built. And I say that because the statistics bear it out. Again, from my numerous conversations with the police department, from my conversations with the folks at downtown Cincinnati, who point that out, from my conversations with Brian Tiffany. everybody who's involved will say, you know, you have to have that.
The hand is extended, you know, but you have to reach up and grab that hand that is extended to you. And that's really the big thing. Is a lot of people that aren't willing to reach up and grab that hand. They want that hand to keep reaching and reaching further and further without, making some effort.
We want to be more than just profit. We want to be profit with a purpose, which means we're going to build brands like our Pampers Can Do brand to succeed in the marketplace. But through that, we want to be able to create jobs and therefore change people's lives, because one of the things that everybody needs is a job to help support their family, to help give them self-esteem, to give them something to look forward to every day. And so we felt that was a role that we could play in our city by hopefully being a catalyst to not only create jobs within our own company, but hopefully encourage others to do the same.
If the system can make its citizens part of that system and they can see the benefit for themselves, then I think they act one way. If they can't see that they're ever going to be part of the system, then I think they act the other way.
Brian Tome and Chuck Mingo from Crossroads Church would also lend a lot of insight to the conversation about change. In Oakley, another one of Cincinnati's growing neighborhoods, Crossroads Church draws 14,000 from all over the city each weekend with its progressive approach to church and religion. Some would argue that outside of downtown, it's one of the most diverse places in Cincinnati, and they just announced another location to open in Florence, Kentucky in March of 2012.
There's $1.6 billion put into our city every year against poverty. $1.6 billion. $1.6 billion. And guess what? The poverty rate does not change. Depending on who's measuring it, we're anywhere from 3rd to 10th in the country. About a quarter of our population is beneath the poverty line. And what's really insidious is how many people think that nothing different should be done. Something different has to happen, and it's not just giving away more food or more clothing, though that's a good thing. We applaud all that happens. What has to happen is relational connection needs to happen. Somebody who knows the rules of the game of how to get ahead financially in society actually develops a relationship with somebody who doesn't know the quote-unquote rules of the game, who's never seen anybody in their house work long enough to get a promotion and earn more money, to save enough to get a down payment on a house, to get economic traction. The rules of poverty don't teach people how to get out of that stuff. And there needs to be relational connection where somebody can actually develop a relationship with somebody and teach them and model this stuff to take them to a new place. And that's the CityLink magic. It's having a nice place where those connections can take place.
Crossroads is known for its outreach in the community and in Africa. Here at home, they're focused on the city's most vulnerable in the development of CityLink. According to their website, it'll be a 5-acre campus. 80,000 square feet of bright, modern, beautiful space will become a gathering place for people who want to make positive life change.
CityLink is about relationships. And if we're ever going to get to a place where economic disparity changes, it's not going to happen unless the people who might reference them as low life start to see them as people with first names, last names, and kids that they hang out with. And that's the power of CityLink, is that's going to happen. And as that happens, I really think that can change this city.
Elements is filling a void. The young people that come to our center are often the misplaced ones, or the ones that that couldn't get in the professional arts schools, the ones that society has forgotten about. So we're providing a safe haven for them to come and congregate, and basically all the instructors here are showing them some love and support. So we're filling a void in a way.
These people are definitely my family. It's really helped me find myself, and I learned a lot about what I could do along the way too. I'm still learning, but this keeps us from a lot, first off, but just in this building alone, you see where these people could be.
I know you hear me, I know you hear me. It's not your conscience anymore. No, I know you hear me, I know you hear me. It's not your conscience anymore. No, I it's me.
My word is possibilities.
Fun.
Change.
Opportunity.
Greatness.
Family friendly.
Better.
Traditional.
Paradoxical.
Home.
Home.
Family.
Non-compliant.
Potential. Philanthropic.
A hometown.
Vibrant.
Transforming.
Complex. There is nothing simple about Cincinnati, Ohio.
Soulful.
Challenging.
Diabolical.
Progressive.
Love.
Hopeful.
Oh, hopeful.
Hopeful.
Thank you for watching this special presentation brought to you tonight by WCPO.
In just a few minutes, we'll be blogging live online at WCPO.com to discuss how you feel after watching tonight's documentary. What changed from your perspective?
And what still needs to change. We'd like to know how the people you heard from inspired you to do something. We're committed to keep this conversation going online and in our newscasts.
Continue to watch 9 News for more in-depth stories about how our city is progressing and who's shaping our future.
On WCPO.com/10 years later, you will also be able to find links to many of the people you heard from tonight, the organizations they represent, and several ways to get involved.
Thank you again for watching this exclusive special, 10 Years Later, A Changed City. Good night.
Good night.